Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 10-19 meta for each stage of the game. So far, the meta in set 4 has kind of been all over the place. It's hard to pin down the best ways to play because, frankly, the game state is never constant due to the chosen mechanic. What players do each game is highly influenced by what chosen they find. Well, we're going to break down each stage of the game nonetheless and take a look at the available options. With all that said, let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As usual, we'll be delving into the different aspects of the early game, starting with items. The item meta has been quite diverse in set 4 and has evolved along with the meta. At the start, we saw a lot of focus on Infinity Edge as a top DPS item, as well as defensive items to combat it. From there, the meta slowly changed into favoring Giant Slayer to combat high health compositions, and most recently, we're seeing a lot of attention focused on Jeweled Gauntlet. So, what are the best items to go for? Well, there's no definitive answer for the current meta, so let's talk about the components that are worth prioritizing and what you can build them into. While each component is viable and useful for quite a few items, the top 4 that you will see prioritized the most are Sword, Chain Vest, Glove, and Rod. Bow, Tier, and Cloak are all great choices, but the first 4 are a higher priority. Belt is last because it has limited uses currently, with Sunfire Cape being the best item that you can make using a belt. Sword and Rod are about equal value to go for. You can use Sword to make items like Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge, Shojin, and most important of all, Guardian Angel. Rod builds into meta items like Jeweled Gauntlet and slightly less valued items like Rage Blade, Death Cap, and Ionic Spark. There's also the potential of getting a Dusk Spatula by holding onto a Rod. Chain Vest has a surprisingly large amount of use in the current meta. Sunfire Cape is an amazing early game item, Guardian Angel, as we mentioned, is a must-have right now, and even Titan's Resolve gets a decent amount of value. The only issue with starting Chain Vest is that you have a weak stage 2 if you don't get good drops from the PvE rounds. If you get stuck with, let's say, a Tier and a Cloak or a second Chain Vest, you're gonna not have easy to slam items and thus have to rely on getting something from the 2-4 carousel. And finally, there's Glove to talk about. Glove feels like an essential component every game because it builds into a lot of great items. Early game, it won't get as much value, so you can wait on picking it up, but you will want gloves later on for items like Jeweled Gauntlet, Infinity Edge, Hand of Justice, and one of the most important items, Quicksilver. What it comes down to for component priority depends on your general playstyle. But for all-around usefulness, you can go for either a glove or chain vest and generally use them in multiple ways. Okay, with items out of the way, let's talk about early game champions, traits, and chosens. Before we get into specifics, it needs to be mentioned that you shouldn't always buy out your shop. The reason is that you won't see a champion in your next shop roll if you didn't buy it in a previous shop. That means you have some influence over what you might see in your shop, and as such, buying everything, even if you have the gold for it, is not always the best idea. Using that knowledge, you can hopefully steer your early game shops towards more specific champions. Keep in mind the chosen mechanic ignores the shop change, so you can still hit a Fiora chosen if you didn't buy her from the previous shop, as an example. But let's get back to a few champions that are worth looking for early in the game. Yasuo, Elise, Twisted Fate, Garen, and Nidalee are all great to buy when you have pairs of them in your shop because their traits are fantastic early game. Those traits are Duelist, Cultist, and Warlord. Moonlight units are also strong, but without a chosen Moonlight, they're a bit less valuable. Of course, other synergies can be good as well, since hitting and playing 2-star champions is still the overall goal. But if you hit any of the above champions with their synergies, especially a chosen of one of those, you're going to be in a great spot to potentially win streak through stage 2. It should be mentioned that there is a chance that you can roll 2-cost chosens when you hit level 4, but those aren't easy to predict or play around. Generally aim to play around your early game 1-cost champions and strong synergies. And above all, it's still the best idea to play what the game gives you. Once you're past the 2-3 carousel is where you begin to see more options presented. 2-cost chosen traits to look out for include Shade Zed, Pike Cultist, Moonlight or Hunter Aphelios, and Warlord Jarvan. Of course, practically any 2 or 3 cost chosen in the early game is going to do well, so again, play what the game gives you. Adapt to it and use it as a means to get to level 7 before pivoting towards something else. And the last section of the early game is leveling and economy. Overall, the meta has no real hard rule to follow in terms of economy. It's possible to play greedy by not leveling at all until you're at 50 gold and lose streaking for additional income. It's equally as viable to play for a win streak if you hit a strong early game chosen. What it mostly comes down to is playing off what the game gives you. Push your advantage with strong early game comps such as Cultist, Keeper, or Duelist by leveling and buying more units than you normally would. Preserving a win streak is one of the easiest ways to do well in the mid game, as you'll have an equal or stronger economy to lose streak players and a much higher health pool than them. On the other hand, it's good to know when leveling won't give you much value and playing slower there is better. Scouting is essential to know your relative strength to others, especially if you haven't been offered a good chosen yet. You can always pivot to a stronger board by leveling if you find a strong chosen to play, but trading health for economy is better early on in the game than later. In terms of leveling time, the standards still apply if you want to keep up with the normal leveling curve. Level 5 around 2.5, level 6 around 3.2 are still common. Leveling to 4 early isn't as necessary as it was in set 3, but you can still do it to push board advantage on 2-1 or 2-2. All in all, your main goal in the early game is to play your strongest board if possible. Otherwise, aim to build up your economy quickly and hit a strong spike in the mid game. Speaking of which, let's move on to the mid game. Here is where set 4 truly shines. Once you're getting into level 6 and 7, the options presented to you will be slightly overwhelming at times. In general, the current meta heavily favors players skipping level 6 and getting to 7 to roll for their composition. This means your timing on level 6 can vary, but your timing on level 7 should almost always be no later than 4-1. Certain reroll compositions do exist, such as Moonlight, Shade, or Mage, but for the most part, you'll want to level to 7. Doing it later puts you at a disadvantage for finding 4-cost champions, as others will have rolled before you. Once you're level 7, roll. Don't roll all of your gold, but roll down to 20 or 30 gold to look for a strong chosen to pivot your composition into. There's quite a few champions that you will be wanting to look for, with the strongest being Riven, Ahri, Jhin, Ashe, Talon, and a few 3-cost champions like Jinx. Basically, whatever you're able to find and you have the items for, pivot towards playing that. There's a lot of meta builds right now, but we'll list a few to give ideas on what you may end up playing at level 7. Brawler Ashe is a strong composition, using Ashe as the carry with a beefy frontline. Play it when you find either a Brawler chosen or Ashe chosen and have items for Ashe like Quicksilver and Giant Slayer. Riven Dusk is an all-around strong composition that uses Riven as the carry. Ideally, you'll get a chosen Riven, but any Dusk chosen is great, or support chosens like Mystic. Basically, get 4 Dusk with Riven and play extra traits around her, whether that's Mystic, frontline like Sejuani, or Cultist for extra damage like Jhin. And there's a multitude of spirit compositions you may be able to play as well. They all hinge on finding Ahri, so don't go for them if you can't find her. Also, you will need a Guardian Angel for her, so make sure that you have that as well. Most of these builds will use 4 Spirit, so in addition to that, you can do 4 Sharpshooter, Shade, or Aphelios Moonlight. Ahri is also usable as the main carry for Vanguard Mystic. Beyond those compositions, you can practically play anything, it all depends on what you hit. Talon Enlightened is still viable, though it can be difficult to play. 6 Cultist is amazing in the mid game as a transition composition for the late game. Some assassin builds do work outside of Talon, but they require a bit of high rolling to find champions like Akali 3. Warlord can do well in the meta, but again, you need to high roll Katarina or Xin Zhao 3 to have a fighting chance in the late game. Essentially, when it comes to your level 7 roll down, don't be too picky. Forcing compositions works well, but learning to play flexible to what the game gives you is an absolutely essential skill to have for this set. After you've rolled a bit on 7 and found a basis for the composition to play, you have 2 options. Continue on level 7 if you need to stabilize, or begin saving gold to hit level 8 around 5-1. Stabilizing basically means you have a board that's strong enough to either win rounds or not lose too much health. Ultimately, you should aim to not lose any health, but if you're bleeding a bit, it's fine as long as you're not dipping below 30 health. If you're strong enough, then save your gold. Look to level 8 sometime around 5-1 or a few rounds after and transition into the late game. And that is exactly where we're going next, folks, to the late game. The late game is really interesting for set 4 because, well, leveling to 9 is not possible for the majority of players in a lobby. This is due to the increased amount of gold it takes to hit level 9 in set 4, making it too much of an investment in most games. So what should your goal be in the late game? It depends, really, but you're either playing to top 4 or in a strong position to play for top 2. Playing to top 4 basically means you're spending your gold aggressively to find upgrades. You're capped on what you can do with your build, and you're too low health to sit on gold. Playing for top 2 means you're saving gold and either investing in slow rolling or aiming to hit level 9 to hit upgraded legendary champions. Set, for example, is one of the best late game champs. Being able to find and 2-star him is quite valuable for placing higher in a game. Kayn is another champion that you can aim for as well. But as we've said, level 9 is often too big of an investment. That means if you're high enough health, you can slow roll for either legendary 2-star champions or to 3-star your board as best you can. Riven, Jhin, Ahri, and Ashe are incredibly strong 3-star champions, so aiming for them can often earn you a first place finish. Overall in the late game, your most important resource is your health. Use this as a game timer of sorts to tell when and how you should spend your gold. Low on health? You need to all in for upgrades. Maybe your health is okay, but you're losing each round. In that case, aim to slow roll your gold for a few rounds. Or if you're healthy enough and have the economy to do so, level to 9. It all depends on what position you're in once the late game arrives. Keep in mind that it's okay to play for a 4th. You're going to gain LP as long as you're in the top 4, and knowing when to play for that is a great way to improve and to climb. That is going to be it for today's video, folks. Set 4 can be quite overwhelming to play as there's so many options, and a lot of them are actually viable. So we hope that this breakdown of the ranked meta will help you climb in the last few days before the new patch arrives. Let us know in the comment section below how your climb has been so far in the new set and what you're looking forward to in patch 1020. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.